You know, when we see those big headlines about China's economy, it's usually all about incredible strength, its manufacturing dominance, its global reach. But what if that's only half the story? Behind that powerful facade, there's a whole other narrative playing out. One of deep internal cracks, of problems being shipped overseas, and a really high-stakes geopolitical endgame.
So, where are we getting this from? Well, our guide for this breakdown is a brand new bipartisan annual report from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. This thing is a super deep dive into the security side of the economic relationship between the U.S. and China, and frankly, its conclusions are pretty stunning.
All right, so what's the story this report is telling? It really breaks down into 5 key chapters. First, the huge gap between what China says and what it does. Then, the serious cracks showing up in its own economy. After that, how it's basically exporting those problems. Then, the global shockwave that's creating. And finally, what the report sees as the ultimate geopolitical agenda behind it all.
Okay, first up, let's just dive right into this fundamental disconnect that the report highlights between the image China projects to the world and what it's actually doing on the global economic stage.
Yeah, the report doesn't pull any punches here. On one hand, you have Beijing presenting itself as this responsible global leader. But on the other, the Commission finds that it's actively distorting the entire global market by just flooding it with a massive surplus of goods that are propped up by the state. And when we say flooding, we mean selling them at prices that are so artificially low, other countries just have no way to compete.
So the big question is, why? Why is this happening? And what's really fascinating is that the report argues this isn't a sign of strength at all. It's actually a direct result of some very serious structural problems that are brewing inside China's own economy.
The core issue here is a word you hear a lot: overcapacity. It sounds technical, but the idea is simple. Imagine you build a bakery that can make 1 million loaves of bread a day, but your whole town only eats about 10,000. What do you do with all the rest? For years, the Chinese government has basically been doing this on a massive national scale, pumping huge amounts of money into manufacturing, creating way more stuff than its own people could ever possibly buy.
And why can't they buy it? Well, because of all these deep economic problems at home. The report goes into detail about how things like high debt, wages that aren't going anywhere, and that huge collapsing property bubble have made Chinese families really, really anxious about their finances. And that's led to incredibly weak demand for goods. And if you need one number to really drive this point home, it's this: 35%. That was the household savings rate in China in 2023. I mean, to give you some perspective, in the US, it's usually in the low single digits. A number that high signals a deep, deep fear about the future. It's exactly why consumption is so weak. People are hoarding cash, not spending it.
So, what do you do if your own citizens aren't buying everything your supercharged factories are churning out? According to the report, China has just doubled down on a very old playbook: export your way out of your problems. Exactly. Instead of making those really tough, politically difficult choices to rebalance the economy so their own people could buy more, the report says Beijing just hit the accelerator on its state-subsidized manufacturing engine. The goal? To have the rest of the world soak up all its extra stuff.
And this leads us to the report's central, flashing red warning light: a second and maybe even more powerful China shock that is now washing over the entire global economy.
Right. So what happens to all this extra stuff? It gets dumped. It's as simple as that. The report says it gets flooded onto world markets at prices so low that they create this massive economic mess, threatening entire industries way, way outside of China.
And this is a really crucial difference. The first China shock, back after it joined the World Trade Organization, that mostly hit lower value goods like furniture and clothes. This new wave is a whole different beast. It's targeting the high-tech, strategic industries that are supposed to be the future of developed economies. We're talking electric vehicles, advanced electronics, even pharmaceuticals.
And look, this isn't just some abstract economic theory. The report spells out the severe, real-world damage that's already happening. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of job losses, thousands of factories closing down in developing countries, and a very real risk of deindustrialization across whole regions. And it's not just them. Even advanced economies like Germany and Japan are now in the crosshairs.
Okay, and this is where it all comes together. The report makes it incredibly clear that this isn't just a wonky economic strategy. It is a core piece of a much larger, much more ambitious geopolitical plan. The report actually details how China's economic might is acting as, and this is their term, decisive enabler, for what it calls an axis of autocracy. Basically, it's providing the economic and material lifeline that allows countries like Russia, Iran, and North Korea to keep up their destabilizing actions and challenge the international system.
And this, right here, is what the report identifies as the endgame. This whole economic strategy is a tool. It's designed to make the world dependent on China, to weaken its competitors, and, ultimately, to reshape global affairs and build a totally new international system with Beijing right at the center.
And hey, don't just take the Commission's word for it. The report directly quotes Chinese policy, and it reveals this explicit goal to weaponize its control over global supply chains, to use economic dependence as a tool for coercion and for deterrence. It's right there in black and white.
So we're left with this final, really provocative thought. The immediate danger, the report says, is China exporting its overcapacity and deflation. But the long-term question, the really big one, is whether it's also exporting its entire state-driven economic model, and in the process, creating a world that isn't just more dependent, but also a whole lot less free.